And when he said that, Hazal says something very interesting. They said they were still not sure, is this really Yosef? He's the viceroy in Egypt. Could it really be Yosef? So he said, Geshuna Elai, Gashu, come closer to me. And they came closer to him, and he showed them his Brit Milah. And they saw the light of the Brit Milah shining with the holiness of Yosef HaTzadik. And they understood that he never sinned in Egypt, that he remained holy. And this is when they sent word back to their father. They said, Oh, Dahinu Hai, our brother is still alive. So really, Yaakov knew Yosef was alive. Because there is a halakha that if someone dies, after a year, a person is consoled of his loss and he can bear it. But Yaakov saw, Lo yachol itnahem, as the Pasuk says, he couldn't receive any comforting. And he remained unhappy as the moment he heard that his son is no more. They brought back to him his colorful jacket, clothed with blood, and told Yaakov, Tarov Tarat Yosef, Hayara Achalatu. Yosef was eaten up by a wild animal. And he saw the blood, he saw the cloak in tatters. Tarov Tarat Yosef. This is the simple meaning. The deeper meaning is, Yaakov, after a year for sure, knew that Yosef is still alive, because the very fact that he couldn't be consoled and he was still feeling all the deep emotions of the loss of Yosef, he knew that Yosef must be alive. Otherwise, but after a year, those feelings would have disappeared. But he understood that he's been sold as a slave to one of the evil nations. Probably he understood is Mitzrayim, which is the next door neighbor, Ervata Aretz, the nakedness of the land, the most evil land in the world. And Tarov Toraf Yosef means that he was gobbled up by evil, by immorality. He's dead, not literally dead. As Hazal said, Rashaim behayehem nikreim metim. His heartbeat is okay. He's intact in all his limbs, but he's dead because he's been gobbled up by the forces of evil in the immorality of Egypt. That's what he understood had happened. So when the brothers tell him, no, oh Yosef, hi, Yosef is alive. As Hazal said, tzaddikim and the righteous, even when they die, they're alive. Because life is spirituality. And Yosef is still alive. When a chicken is slaughtered, or a cow for that matter, after that, it makes all sorts of uncontrollable movements, can even jump and fly and whatever. It's called in halakha pirkus. So once in England, the parliament wanted to pass a law to forbid shahita. They said, look at the suffering, how after the slaughtering, the animals are jumping and flying and they don't, So a rabbi, very learned in science as well, wrote a thesis concerning this concept of pirkus, of what it's all energy within the limbs which are causing the limbs to move in this crazy way, but the animal is dead. Once its throat was slit, it's dead and it has no feeling because the brain and the rest of the body has been disconnected. So there's no feeling in the sinews going down to every area of the body, so nothing is felt and it's dead. It's considered dead. It's jumping. It's dead. So if Hazal say that the wicked, even when they're alive, they're dead. So people will ask, what do you mean they're dead? Don't we see them playing sports and dancing and running and coming and going? Yeah. Just like we see an animal after shahita, it's jumping and running and flying, but it's dead. So we have to know what life is. People who think that life is a sip of Coca-Cola or playing games or sports or things like that, they don't know what life is. They have to know life is spirituality. We live with our soul. The body is, okay, connected to the soul, it can be also holy. But the true source of life is our Jewish soul, which Hashem blew into Adam Arishon, and we inherited from the breath of Hashem. It's divine. And the soul exists forever. And that's life. So Yosef was alive. Now to translate all these concepts into our current situations, there are different stages in our history, and in each period there were different trials and tribulations for the Jewish people. Like 200 years ago, the big problem was Haskalah, so-called Haskalah, which at that stage, the European countries opened up their universities and their places of culture, like ballet and the orchestras, that Jews can visit and be part of the way of the living of the Goyim. What did this cause? Tremendous assimilation. It brought many, many Jews to total kfirah, who stopped believing in the Torah and tried to be like non-Jews and lost their Jewish identity. It gave birth to the Reform movement and many other problematic situations in Am Yisrael. But really today that's not our problem. People are not bothered about whether the Torah is true or Aristotle and Plato are right, or that's not. No one is kidding themselves in that area anymore. Down to the truth, immorality. That's the most powerful pull towards evil in our generation. Immorality, and all the new inventions of the high tech, of smartphones, of videos, of internet, etc. It's to bombard the world with immorality day and night. Evil things which were never even dreamt of by normal people. Perverse and sick in the head people who live a life of immorality, where everything is upside down and everything normal is despised. This is our problem. And we have to combat it. So if the Chovevim are coming up and people think, I'm going to fast, I'll give charity to atone for my sins, that's nice. But that's not the solution at all. Already the great Kabbalist Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto wrote in his Mesilat Yesharim, in his introduction to the book, that many people are mistaken to think that the way to repent is by fasting and self-inflicted suffering by all sorts of other means as well, like jumping into a frozen lake or something. He says all this is nonsense. It doesn't start with that. Maybe that's the last final stage in repentance. After years and years of repenting, first of all, tshuva means stop doing the bad things. Start doing the good things. Regret what you've done bad. Regret the mitzvot that you missed doing. Deep down in your soul, cry about how you have sinned. And take upon yourself never to sin again. And admit your sin before Hashem, that's repentance. Like the Rambam says, Rabbeinu Yonah writes in Sha'arei Tshuva, that's repentance. So at this time of our lives, in our generation, when we see how immorality is out loose and the world is bombarded, you can't go anywhere. You walk in the street, you have billboards, you have all sorts of, everything, shop windows, whatever you want, wherever you are. The theme of the world today is immorality, is pritzut, lack of modesty, total lack of modesty. that people don't have shame anymore. So how are Am Israel going to combat this? Baruch Hashem, we're not doing too bad. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews who keep mitzvot and are particular in their way of life, of shalom bayit, of bringing up children educated on the foundation of the holiness of Klal Israel, who work on themselves and protect themselves from all this evil, and are not open to all these available mass media contamination, which is certainly much worse than the coronavirus, because people can become totally addicted to this, and it's very bad, very difficult to pull them out of it. Am Israel are not going to be a nation who their prime treasure, which is the wives of Klal Israel, who are the ones they are the incubator where the babies are born and the holy soul comes into them, the Jewish soul to their children, that they're going to be ruled over by the fashion designers of Europe or London or America, and these pervert, crazy people are going to decide how a woman should be dressed, which is totally immoral. Maybe sometimes it could be long sleeve and long skirt, doesn't make a difference. They know how to make it immoral and insulting to the woman and insulting to mankind. We were created in the image of God, and we're insulting our image of God. So this is our true battleground today, in this area of tzniut, shalom bayit, pritzut, to live holy lives, protected lives, not to indulge in all the evil of the outside world, even though it's dished out to us and available for everyone to see. Even kids can, if they're not protected from the evil of the internet, etc., even they have they're brilliant in manipulating these new types of machines. What takes the parents years to understand, they know in 5 minutes, and it destroys their holy soul. This is the foundation. And this is what Chovevim means. It's not about fasting. Fasting is for people who have repented their sins and have attained high levels through Torah and mitzvot, and now they want the final shine. Okay, have a fast, give a pidyon. But we're speaking about the Aleph Bet, the beginnings, how to start improving in this area of the holiness of Klal Israel, and this is the way that I've just said to you. This is what we have to do. We have to declare a war against immorality, a war against materialism and physicality, and develop ourselves spiritually. We are a spiritual, holy nation. Kedushim tehiu, be holy, ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem. You are linked to me. I am part of you. Be holy. I will make you holier and holier.